This is Phil from PricewaterhouseCoopers.
What I'm going to talk about, being the non-advertising guy who's going to be talking, is a little bit of a scene setter about where we actually see money moving, not just into digital advertising, but in advertising more generally, and why we think it's moving between certain different categories. And we have a report each year called the Entertainment and Media Outlook that essentially does that. It says, what are we seeing in the marketplace, and how do you translate that into who are going to be the winners and losers? Who's going to make money over the following 5-year period? So we always forecast out for a 5-year period. And one of the key themes that we had in this book this year is that we think we've reached something that we termed the end of the digital beginning. Now, we have seen over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, when we talk to boards and to strategic people sitting inside organisations, that they've been a little bit confused for the last several years, and actually confused to an extent where they've actually almost had paralysis, that they haven't wanted to do certain things. They've been saying, my old business model is dying, I haven't quite worked out what the new business model looks like, help, what do I do? And over the course of the last 12 months, as we were putting the latest forecast together, we began to see that the chief executives and the strategy directors began to be a little bit more articulate about what they thought the challenges ahead were, and therefore what they might need to do about it. And that's actually moved from a period of inactivity and waiting to see what's happened into a period of saying, well, actually, this is the new normal. We've been talking about digital coming for a long time. Digital's not coming, digital's here, and actually, where do we play and how do we organise ourselves so that we are integrated as a digital operation? That's not just for agencies, but actually for media owners and for the advertisers who are interacting with you all. So, big picture stuff. I just wanted to show, this may be a little bit difficult at the back. We think the world is a complicated place, and actually saying how is media doing or how is advertising doing is a really difficult question unless you hone it down to both what country are you talking about and what sort of medium are you talking about. So here in the UK, for example, newspapers are having a really difficult time as compared to Guy's internet advertising numbers that we put together each year. Most of the Western and the mostly developed territories like the US, the UK, Germany, France, all growing at pretty low levels, about 3 or 4% per annum for the next 5 years. Contrast that with the BRIC countries that we hear a lot about, which is all 10 to 12 or 13% per annum for the next 5 years. And then an increasing large number of countries coming through the Vietnams and the Middle East and some of the Latin American countries, which are now growing at those rates that we used to see out of the BRIC countries into the 20s and the 30%. Overall, we track media between 13 different segments, of which internet advertising, that we'll talk a little bit more about tonight, is one. And you'll see, actually, if you follow these charts, and I'm sure these slides will be available afterwards. Internet advertising is by far and away the fastest growth stock and sector that we see, and right down the bottom, some of the things, the more traditional media like newspaper publishing, consumer magazines, and consumer book publishing. TV we're still pretty upbeat about. So actually when we think about the mix of advertising, TV we think is complementary, and a lot of the stuff that we see coming through on mobile advertising and fixed internet advertising is complementary. Globally, advertising spending growth, the chart on the far left is internet advertising, we think growing at about 16% per annum for the next 5 years globally. Overall, in terms of a global basis, that moves internet advertising to being about 20% of all advertising by the end of the forecast period. Of course, here in the UK, we're already at a position where we're at about 28% for internet advertising overall, and we are still putting the fastest growth rate of all UK advertising into internet advertising for the next 5 years, so it will be taking market share as we go. Those UK numbers are internet advertising, we think, growing about 12% per annum for the next 5 years, which puts Guy again under pressure. But some of the places that it's coming from, business-to-business publishing, newspapers and the consumer magazines, even though they are developing their own digital offerings and their own digital strategy, will still be under pressure in that. Just to give a sense as to where that's moving, this is internet advertising last year and where we think it will be in 5 years' time. Globally, digital advertising around about 19% of total advertising last year. Television about 35%. What this though does is it double counts. It says if digital advertising exists, I'm going to stick it into the digital advertising box, which means if it's a TV company which is actually having digital advertising around pre-roll or video, we've excluded it from the TV segment. So if you were to continue to do that and lump all online advertising into digital, it would grow from about 20% to about 30% over the 5-year period. If, though, you were to reallocate that back out to who's actually earning that money, the internet advertising goes down from about 30% to 20%. What it leaves in there largely is search, and it leaves internet advertising which is being earned by non-media companies. So increasingly a number of people are earning this revenue apart from the traditional media companies. But for example, you can see television grows from 37% to 38% because they're getting a proportionate share of some of that internet advertising as they go. The consequences for that are profound for media companies and for agencies because it's a new world. And actually one of the things, we see three key themes as we go through this. It's a shift from print and offline to digital, it's a shift from fixed internet to mobile internet, and it's a shift from east to west when you look at the growth rates. And with those three big trends, actually that's having a big impact on business models for corporates and for the advertisers in reaching the audiences they want to reach. You talked about data being a topic for next time around. Actually, one of our key themes that we're running at the moment is if you're in a telco, you talk about big data, but actually big data is irrelevant. The only good reason to have big data is to be able to search out the little data that sits within it, the key nuggets of information that will enable you to take an informed management decision. So we're talking a lot about how do you find the little data in big data. But data is really important, and particularly in terms of how you then encourage a customer to interact with a brand. We believe that in this increasing age where time is the real determinant as to how much time is the only really limiting factor for people, there are three ways that people find information. There's good branding, there's search, and there's recommendation. And harnessing all three of those in a multimedia strategy, whether it's fixed internet, mobile internet, or more traditional advertising, means that you can interact with the customer in a different way. But actually the customer is demanding that you interact in a different way because they're saying it's no longer good enough that you stick that advert on ITV and you push it out to me. I don't want to be the recipient of that. I want to have a real-time conversation with you about your brand, and I want to be involved and I want to be engaged with you. We've seen the concepts, particularly through the advertising industry, of bought, owned and earned media. We're beginning to see managed media coming as well, which is, you need to interact with people in a variety of different ways, but included in that is you need to have the same brand feel across all of those media. So too often you might call a call centre and get a completely different customer experience to the one that they offered you on a website or in a TV advert. And getting the branding across every single interaction, across every device that you interact with people on is really important. When we sit with the advertisers rather than the advertising agencies themselves, the advertisers are saying, actually, yes, we get this. We need to be part of this comprehensive conversation that we're having with customers that doesn't involve simply handing over an idea to an agency and sitting back and waiting for the sales to come in. We both need to be involved in a conversation with customers because they're demanding it from us, but actually we find it really useful in terms of new product development and new ideas which are coming back from the audience as well. So personalised, offering compelling content. You see, even with viral videos, it's the ones that are funny, it's the ones that people want to share. You don't necessarily then have control over where they're going, but you know that the branding and the messaging is out there. And being able to track that in terms of data will become more and more important. The old marketing agency used to take a brand and interact with an agency and push a message out to a customer. I think we've been in an era for the last 3 or 4, maybe even longer than that, of where digital marketing has been seen to be a really, really important part of the mix, but it's been standalone. It's been sitting outside either in a specialised agency, or it's been the clever people who sit down the end of the corridor in an agency that everybody wants to go and talk to because they're kind of exciting, but you don't really understand how they're going to make any money for you. Increasingly, we've seen that it's a little bit like when commercial television launched, that there were specialist commercial television buying agencies that over time morphed and became part of true multimedia agencies. And we're seeing an increasing amount of digital being embedded at the heart of all organisations, including within agencies. And actually part of the challenge is making sure that everybody understands and has the same level of understanding about digital, but also some of the challenge is wondering whether your customers are ready to interact with you in that way, because some of the procurement and some of the marketing functions within the big advertisers are still very linear, and they still spend their money in an old traditional way. And breaking down some of those barriers will be where people like Mediacom are trying to take you. So just to sum up, that's what I spend quite a lot of time talking to my media companies and agencies about. There are some things that you can't deal with, but you need to react to, some external factors. So for the media companies, what do you do with piracy? How do you respond to regulation? But what's inside and what's in the gift of companies as they work through their strategy? Cost optimization has been a big play for the last several years. Actually, I think that's moving back into a growth strategy. You can only cut so far, and if we're in a new normal of the economy, you can't cut any further. What you've actually got to do is stimulate some growth, and that's completely in keeping with where the government thinks that they need to move the UK. You see that in corporate boards as well, that you've got to move beyond and into a growth strategy. If you own intellectual property, what are you doing around actually monetizing it? If you have something which you can tag with metadata, how do you drive that through an organisation so that you can use libraries and back data properly? Back catalogue, making sure that you commercialise it properly, really making sure that you're using new digital platforms and technologies in a consistent way to get your branding and your messages across. And crucially, the one that we probably spend as much time as anything on is, have you got the right people inside your organisation? They may have been right for the business model that you were running 5 years ago, but is it right for today, and really, is it right for tomorrow if you think about where your organisation may be running to? And so we encourage corporates to think about everything that's up there on that slide. How do you really drive innovation through your organisation? How do you harness the talent of young people in the organisation without losing sight that you probably have an existing business model which is the central driver to how you make money today, that is generating the cash flow that you should be investing in tomorrow's business. So you can't switch one off and move to the other. How do you have a stepped transition by keeping both parts of the organisation happy? And that's the challenge of integrating digital at the heart of every organisation. So we think it's here. Enjoy.
firsttuesday.org.uk. Don't network, be the network.